We are live on YouTube.
Okay.
Most of the people join in from the YouTube. Majority of them. They find that convenient actually.
So, can we see them when they join? I mean, do we know who all are joining?
Yeah, if they give a comment, then yes. If they don't comment, then we will not know. We will only know so many people have joined.
Okay.
But generally, people put their questions there. So on my computer, I have got both synchronized. So the moment they put a question there, it gets transferred into the Google Meet chat box.
Okay.
So then you would be able to see those questions coming from them.
They don't listen live.
Yes, it's live. It's live. Absolutely.
They also see.
There will be a 30 seconds delay in transmission.
Okay.
Because it goes through a software, but it's almost live. Almost like say just 30 seconds delay. Like if you just now open your YouTube and you go to the channel, you will see. If you click the link which we had sent, you can see on the YouTube the same page which we are showing here.
Okay.
We had shared two links. One was the Google Meet link and one was a YouTube link. And majority of the people would see these things later because they're all recorded.
That's why.
And we do a recording, editing, and then we upload our edited version, the crisp version.
Okay.
So, like, say, suppose by tomorrow morning, maybe 300 people would have seen the video. And all these are recorded and they are kept in the YouTube channel. So anybody can see these lectures anytime, listen to them, and
It will be there forever.
forever, yeah.
Okay.
And we have a link, and if you take that, go to the link, go to the playlist. According to systems, it has been sorted out. So lymph node is separate, soft tissue is separate, GI is separate. Like that is separate.
You get any feedback?
Yes, we get lots of feedback. We get feedbacks regarding lectures, regarding speakers. When people demand, please ask so and so to come and speak. Like people, they had sent a special request for Dr. Gitanjali to come and speak on another topic. They said there are a lot of people, but then we go back and request them. Most of them are so busy that they say that they don't have time to come back. We get a lot of feedback. By tomorrow morning, we will be having more than 300 people already seen, downloaded. So we are about to start. So Dr. Amanjit, you are ready?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
You want me to keep my video on or off?
Yeah, you can keep your video on.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening episode of Pursue. This is Pursue 2G, which is lymph nodal pathology, and we are streaming live from PGIMER Chandigarh via Kolkata. Today we have a very special, intriguing topic, a topic of much demand, which is the pathology of the T-cell non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And to talk on that, we have somebody who's a specialist in this. We have Dr. Amanjit Bal. She's an MD, DNB. She's a master's in molecular pathology and genomics from the famous Barts Cancer Institute, London. And she is presently a professor in the Department of Histopathology in the famous PGI Chandigarh, with more than 250 publications in national and international peer-reviewed journals. Her area of interest being lung pathology, breast pathology, and lymphoma. She has also been awarded the Commonwealth Scholarship, the VR Konalkar Award, and also awarded Dr. Reddy's Lung Cancer Oration at the famous ISSLC 2018. Before I ask Madam to take over, let me request all of you to please keep your mic muted, your camera off, and please do not share your screen. With this, let me request Dr. Ramanjit ma'am, please start sharing and please take your stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nadeem, for kind introduction and for having us, participate in your series of lectures, which I think many residents are gaining a lot of it from these lectures. So I'll be talking today on pathology of T-cell lymphomas. So what I have tried to do is discuss it according to the case-wise teaching. So before coming to the proper cases, I just wanted to take you through the maturation of T cells. So T cells, they arise from the precursor cells which are present in the bone marrow, then they mature in the thymus. The cortical thymocytes or cortical T cells are immature cells, whereas the medullary thymocytes or medullary T cells are the mature ones. And the lymphomas which arises from the immature T cells are the lymphoblastic lymphomas, which you have already heard from Dr. Sanjay Jogai in his lecture when he talked about the mediastinal malignancies. So the mature T cells, they migrate from the thymus to the peripheral lymph nodes. So in mature lymphocytes, we have two sets of lymphocytes, one which participate in the innate immunity and one which participates in the adaptive immunity. So the markers of innate immunity are the natural killer cells and the gamma delta T cells. So lymphomas which are arising from these two group of cells are usually extranodal lymphomas because these cells are present in the spleen, mucosa associated lymphoid tissue and peripheral blood as well as in the skin. Whereas the T cells which participate in the adaptive immune response, they are more heterogeneous, and we have two sets of T cells, CD4 positive T cells and CD8 positive T cells. CD4 positive T cells are further heterogeneous and they have different subtypes based upon the cytokines they release, and the major subgroups includes the T helper cell 1, T helper cell 2, T regulatory cells, T helper cell 17. And some of these CD4 positive T lymphocytes, they migrate within the germinal center and they constitute a special group which is T follicular helper cells. And within the germinal centers, that is a B zone area, they take part in activating the B cells and antibody secretions. Whereas the CD8 positive or the cytotoxic T cells are relatively lesser subcategorized in contrast to the CD4 positive T cells. So T cell lymphomas, they correspond to the various stages of normal T cell maturation. So this chart is very important for understanding the different subtypes of T cell lymphomas. So WHO 2017 classifies mature T cell lymphomas, which we'll be concentrating on today. It can be divided based on the site of the location, which are cutaneous, nodal, extranodal, or those with leukemic presentation. So I'll be covering nodal and few of the extranodal entities in my talk. So in nodal, we have anaplastic large cell lymphoma, which is further classified into ALK negative and ALK positive anaplastic large cell lymphoma, and extranodal ones, which is a breast implant associated ALCL. Then we have angioimmunoblastic T cell lymphoma, or which is also known as a T cell lymphoma of a follicular helper T cell origin. And the cases which cannot be categorized into these two categories are termed as peripheral T cell lymphoma, NOS. And then we have extranodal T cell lymphomas, which include NK T cell nasal type, enteropathy associated EATL type 1, and which was previously known as type 1, then type 2, which has a new name, so I'll cover these, then indolent T cell proliferations, hepatosplenic, subcutaneous and EBV related disorders. So we'll discuss a few cases which we commonly see in our practice. So this was based on the location of the lymphomas, and if we have to classify them on the basis of cell of origin, then it can be divided into follicular helper cell origin, which includes anaplastic large cell lymphoma and peripheral T cell lymphoma, NOS, or the T follicular helper cell origin, which includes angioimmunoblastic T cell lymphoma and nodal PTCL with T follicular helper phenotype, or a follicular T cell lymphoma. The frequency of these mature T cell lymphomas is variable, and the commonest one which is encountered in our practice is PTCL NOS, probably because it's a waste basket. If you cannot place any lymphoma in subcategory, then you tend to call it NOS. Then followed by ALK positive ALCL and ALK negative ALCLs, then angioimmunoblastic T cell lymphomas, then enteropathy associated T cell lymphomas and NK T cell lymphomas and ATLL. So I'll start with the cases. So first case is of Mr. T, who is a 27-year-old male. He presented with chief complaints of bilateral inguinal lymphadenopathy for 3 months and a non-healing ulcer over right thigh of 9-month duration. It was associated with generalized weakness, easy fatigability, and there was a considerable weight loss from 110 to 76 kgs over a period of 8 months. So on gross examination, you can see this is the thigh ulcer, which is a large ulcer of about 10 into 12 centimeters on the anterior aspect of right thigh. But in addition to this large ulcer, there were multiple lymph nodes, which included bilateral submandibular and cervical lymph nodes, bilateral axillary lymph nodes, and the right inguinal mass, which was the largest, measuring 5 into 3 centimeters. On investigations, there was some increase in total leukocyte count. The platelets were also increased and the serum LDH was markedly elevated. So this is the PET scan. If you see this complete image, it's almost completely blackened out in the different areas of the body. So we have different lymph nodes, level of lymph nodes enlarged both above and below the diaphragm. So all these are showing quite high SUV value on FDG PET. For this patient, biopsies from 2 sites were done, one from the skin lesion which was ulcerated and second from the right inguinal lymph node, which was the largest lymph node on clinical examination. So I'll start with the lymph node biopsy. You can see the capsule of the lymph node is thickened and there is complete effacement of the nodal architecture, at least in this magnification, and it's replaced by these large pale looking cells. So if we see another magnification, we can see some preserved native mature looking lymphoid cells in the follicular pattern, and it is in between there are these clusters of cells. So these cells are trying to cluster themselves rather than singly scattered, which we tend to see in most of the lymphomas. On high magnification, we can see most of these cells are pleomorphic. They are having vesicular nuclear chromatin, prominent nucleoli, and some of these are showing abnormal shapes, like some are kidney shaped, some are showing embryoid shape. So it's showing a pleomorphic morphology with vesicular nuclear chromatin and moderate eosinophilic cytoplasm. So morphologically, till now, we can call it a high-grade lymphoma. So for subclassification, a panel of immunohistochemistry is done, CD45, since it was showing lot of clustering. So CD45 is usually done to exclude, or even pan-CK should be done in these cases to exclude the epithelial malignancy. However, in this case, CD45 was positive, but if you see, it's faintly positive as compared to the mature lymphocytes, which show slightly brighter positivity as compared to the neoplastic cells. CD20 immunostain highlights few reactive B cells at the periphery, but most of the neoplastic cells are negative, and so is true for CD3. It is also showing few reactive T cells, but the larger cells are more or less negative. So the next marker which is being done here is CD30, and if you see, CD30 is diffusely positive and it's showing nice strong membranous positivity, and at places there is evidence of Golgi zone accentuation also. So when you see this bright CD30 positivity, the first diagnosis which comes to your mind is anaplastic large cell lymphoma, and the next step in ALCL is to look for the expression of ALK. So in this case, the ALK immunohistochemistry was negative. The second was from the thigh biopsy. So if you see, this is a skin biopsy which is showing ulceration, and in the dermis we have a lot of these blue appearing cells, and the morphology of these cells is similar to what we saw in the lymph node. So these are pleomorphic cells with different shapes and size of nuclei and eosinophilic cytoplasm, and again CD30 is strongly and diffusely positive. So for ALCL, CD30 positivity should be strong and more diffuse because other lymphomas also tend to show CD30 expression. So this was labeled as anaplastic large cell lymphoma ALK negative because ALK negative and ALK positive are two separate categories in WHO classification now. So what is anaplastic large cell lymphoma? It is a mature T cell lymphoma which is derived from activated mature cytotoxic T cells which are CD30 positive. So CD30 positivity is the defining criteria for calling it anaplastic large cell lymphoma. They tend to grow cohesively. So when they tend to grow cohesively, the differential diagnosis is epithelial malignancies. They tend to invade the sinuses. So here we can see a sinusoidal pattern of distribution, and the cells are large, pleomorphic, with the nuclear morphology which is horseshoe shaped, and they have abundant eosinophilic cytoplasm. So these are the hallmark cells of anaplastic large cell lymphoma, and these hallmark cells are seen in almost all the morphological variants of anaplastic large cell lymphoma. So what are the other variants which we see? This I showed was a common pattern, but we do have lymphohistiocytic pattern where the background shows lot of histiocytes and other cells, and sometimes there are too many that the neoplastic cells are overshadowed and difficult to appreciate on histology. Then we have a small cell pattern which may mimic like any other T cell lymphoma rather than ALCL, and Hodgkin's-like which mimics nodular sclerosis Hodgkin's lymphoma. So here we have these RS-like cells, but lot of polymorphic background in the polymorphous cells in the background. Again, CD30, as I said, is the defining criteria. Here you see a nice membranous positivity with Golgi zone, which is a dot-like accentuation. So what about the T cell markers in anaplastic large cell lymphomas? So great majority of ALCLs express either one or other T cell or natural killer cell antigens, but most of these are showing loss of CD3. So most of the ALCLs do not show expression of CD3 on their cell surface, and this is seen in around 75% of cases, and these are also negative for CD5 and CD7. CD2 and CD4 are more useful and are positive in significant number of cases. So what is the importance of doing T cell markers in ALCL? Because before calling it null cell phenotype, you should not rely only on the expression of CD3. You should do more T cell markers. But if you don't do these T cell markers, no harm is done because there is no prognostic difference between the null cell phenotype or a T cell phenotype of ALCL. So WHO 2016 classifies this as nodal ALCL, which is ALK positive, and second is ALK negative, and extranodal ALCLs, which includes the breast implant associated ALCL and cutaneous anaplastic large cell lymphoma. Cutaneous anaplastic large cell lymphomas is a separate category because it has a very good prognosis if it is limited to skin only. So what is ALK? ALK is a tyrosine kinase which belongs to insulin receptor superfamily. It is a transmembrane protein, and in addition to anaplastic large cell lymphomas, it is expressed in other conditions also like neuroblastoma, some subtypes of DLBCLs, and inflammatory myofibroblastic tumors. On immunohistochemistry, different patterns of ALK positivity have been demonstrated. So in majority of the cases, you tend to see a nuclear as well as cytoplasmic positivity, which is the commonest pattern. In some cases, you tend to see cytoplasmic staining, and there is accentuation of this staining towards the cell membrane, and it can be ALK negative also. Now, these different patterns of staining depends upon the type of rearrangement is there. So the commonest rearrangement of ALK is with NPM, that is translocation 2,5, which shows nuclear and diffuse cytoplasmic positivity, and it is noted in around 85% of cases. And the other rare fusion partners are TPM3, ATIC, and so on, and which show variable positivity on or a different pattern of staining on immunohistochemistry, like diffuse cytoplasmic, membranous staining, and sometimes nuclear or cytoplasmic both. Now coming to the ALK negative ALCL. So as contrast to ALK positive ALCL, the ALK negative ALCLs are most heterogeneous group of lymphomas, but you cannot differentiate these on morphology. So CD30 positive expression, and most of the morphological features are same as we see in the ALK negative ALCLs. However, the only difference is the expression of the ALK protein. In contrast to ALK positive ALCLs, ALK negative ones are seen in slightly elderly patients and usually in 6th decade, and they have a more aggressive clinical course. You tend to see involvement of both lymph nodes as well as extranodal tissues. Some people have described that cells in the ALK negative ALCLs are much more larger and pleomorphic as compared to ALK positive ALCLs. However, apart from age, like younger will be more ALK positive and the elderly will be more ALK negative ALCLs. Based upon morphology, it is very difficult to predict the ALK status. So, since these group of tumors or lymphomas, ALK negative ALCLs, are heterogeneous in clinical behavior also, so next generation studies have revealed that these lymphomas show a characteristic rearrangements which is involving the DUSP22 which joins with the adjoining FRA7H fragile site on chromosome 7. So DUSP22 on chromosome 6 and fragile site on chromosome 7 is the translocation which has been noted in the subsets of ALK negative anaplastic large cell lymphomas, and it's seen only in the ALK negative and has not been demonstrated in ALK positive ALCLs, and you can detect this using a fluorescence in situ hybridization also. In addition to this DUSP22 rearrangement, the other rearrangement which has been noted in ALK negative ALCLs is the TP63 rearrangement. So this TP63 gene encodes the tumor protein P63, which is also known as transformation related protein, and it is a member of a P53 family of transcription factors. And the common fusion partner is TBL1XR1 on chromosome 3. And the ALK negative ALCLs which are showing TP63 rearrangement are associated with aggressive behavior. And around 43 and 40% of ALK negative ALCLs, both nodal as well as cutaneous ALCLs, they show TP63 rearrangements. However, it has not been reported in ALK positive anaplastic large cell lymphomas. So you can use FISH, that is a definitive for TP63 arrangement. However, immunohistochemistry can be used as a screening test to conduct FISH for confirming TP63 rearrangement. So, in addition to ALK, which is the ALK positive ALCL, the ALK negative ALCLs show two rearrangements, either DUSP22 rearrangement, which I said is between chromosome 6 and 7. The other is P63 rearrangement, which can be detected by immunohistochemistry as a nuclear expression. And the ALK negative ALCLs which do not show these two rearrangements are termed as a triple negative anaplastic large cell lymphomas. So, what is the role of doing these two arrangements or looking for these two arrangements? No, there is no diagnostic significance of these. However, these do provide a prognostic significance. So, if you see both ALK positive as well as DUSP22 rearranged anaplastic large cell lymphomas have a similar prognosis as compared to the TP63 rearranged, which has the worst prognosis. And the cases which are negative for all these three rearrangements have a prognosis in between the ALK positive ones and the TP63 rearranged. So, looking for these alterations has a prognostic significance. So, we looked at our cohort of anaplastic large cell lymphomas, which is at the stage of proofreading now. So, there were 37% cases were ALK positive. So we are talking about the adult anaplastic large cell lymphomas because the clinical behavior of adult and the pediatric ALCLs is relatively different from each other. So this is pure adult population. 37 were ALK positive. 17 were positive for P63 rearrangement, and only 6% had DUSP22 rearrangement on FISH, and the 40% still remained as a triple negative anaplastic large cell lymphomas. And they did show a difference in the behavior, with the TP63 and the triple negative ones behaving bad as compared to the ALK positive and DUSP22 rearranged. Okay, so that was about the nodal anaplastic large cell lymphomas. What about the extranodal? So as I said, primary cutaneous anaplastic large cell lymphomas is morphologically and immunophenotypically similar to what we see in their nodal counterparts, and these are ALK negative ALCLs. However, despite being ALK negative, they are associated with good prognosis. So that's why they are not clubbed with the systemic ALCLs. Then seroma associated ALCLs, which are commonly seen in breast implants, and they present with malignant cells that infiltrate the prostatic capsule or in the periprostatic seroma or tissue also, and they can infiltrate the breast parenchyma also. So if they are limited to the capsule of the implant only, so they have a relatively better prognosis, but if they tend to infiltrate the stroma of the breast parenchyma, they will behave relatively badly. And overall, they have an indolent course, just similar to what we see in a cutaneous anaplastic large cell lymphoma. So in our setup, if we have to differentiate between these cutaneous ALCLs and ALK negative systemic ALCL, which is involving the skin. So in our case, which I presented just now, so there was involvement of systemic lymph nodes and there was a cutaneous involvement. Had it been only cutaneous involvement, it would have behaved nicely, but now it is a systemic ALCL which has secondarily involved the skin. So this differentiation is important from a prognostic point of view. Memory implant associated ALCLs we have not seen in our setup, but we have seen two cases of metal implant associated anaplastic large cell lymphomas. This one is a case of a squamous cell carcinoma of the mandible, which underwent a mandibulectomy, and followed by this patient got this metal implant, and after 2 years it developed a nodular lesion at the site of implant, and morphologically it was anaplastic large cell lymphoma, which was negative for DUSP22 rearrangement, was negative for ALK, however showed TP63 expression. And the other case, which I have not put here, was on fracture of a tibia with a metal rod in it, but that also showed extensive systemic involvement. So that is not very clear cut whether it is memory implant associated or by chance that site is showing a lymphomatous process. So this was about anaplastic large cell lymphoma and its morphological and molecular variants. So coming,
there is a question here. Would you like to take question?
Yes, please. But how will I see?
Oh, I'll read it to you. No issue. This is from Dr. Minesh Gandhi from Rajkot. He says variant translocation in ALCL may produce ALK IHC negative falsely. So should all ALK negative ALCLs be conformed with fish? I'll read it again.
Okay.
He says variant. Yeah, you got the question right. Okay.
So I think what he's trying to ask, if an ALK IHC is negative, then whether we should do ALK fish or not, to actually confirm that it is actually ALK negative. So I think the different studies have shown that ALK immunohistochemistry is quite approximately more than 95% correlates with the ALK rearrangement. And sometimes it depends upon the ALK, as he rightly said, upon the type of antibody you are using. But now people are preferring the D5F3 clone of ALK, which even picks up the smaller amount of a fusion protein. So if you are using ALK D5F3 clone, so probably the chances of missing ALK rearrangements are fewer. So that will save you going for fish. So hope I answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely fine. I mean, we will just, because this is from the YouTube, so we'll just have to see if there's a counter question. We'll take it up later, right? Okay. You can go ahead. Sorry, please go ahead. Fine, thank you.
So coming to case 2, so this is Mr. SC. He's a 55-year-old male, and he had fever of 2 months, which was on and off, progressive swelling in the right groin of 2.2 centimeter, which progressed from 2 centimeter to 5 centimeter of size. And this patient also had multiple skin eruptions all over the body associated with severe pruritus and skin excoriations. On examination, there was a cervical lymphadenopathy, axillary lymphadenopathy, and the inguinal lymph nodes, and the inguinal lymph nodes were the largest ones. And in addition, he had multiple erythematous skin lesions over face, pinna, limbs, and chest. And CECT also revealed multiple enlarged lymph nodes throughout the body, both supradiaphragmatic and infradiaphragmatic phlegmatic, and it also showed hepatosplenomegaly and few ill-defined nodules in the bilateral upper lobes. So this is the clinical picture of the skin lesions which were diffusely present all over the abdomen and even the chest. So I don't have the PET findings of this case, but they did a lymph node biopsy for this patient, and if we see the low part of the lymph node, so there is effacement of the lymph node architecture. However, here we can see some residual follicle towards the right lower end, but most of the lymph node architecture is maintained. So if we see at this low part, we can see a lot of these capillary channels or high endothelial venules and some clear cells which are trying to cluster themselves around these high endothelial venules. Okay. So this is better appreciated on a higher magnification. So these are the high endothelial venules, right? And these are the clusters of those cells which are small to medium size. They don't look that bad. They have a clear cytoplasm and they are tending to cluster themselves around these high endothelial venules. So on immunohistochemistry, as we saw, a few of the smaller looking lymphoid follicles were there. So these represent the normal looking lymphoid component or a residual component of lymph node. These clear cells were dominantly positive for CD3. They were positive for CD4, and the CD7, if you compare it with CD3 and CD4, is slightly downregulated. So this is one of the features which you usually tend to see in T cell lymphomas, the downregulation of one or two T cell markers. And CD7 is the most common one which tends to downregulate in these lymphomas. So CD23 was done, which is showing expansion of the follicular dendritic meshwork. So CD23 is a marker of a follicular dendritic cells. So it is showing expansion. So when I say expansion, it means it is extra follicular localization of these dendritic cells. And so is the expression of CD10, which is usually seen in the germinal centers, but here you are seeing it outside the germinal centers, and if you correlate with CD3 expression, it is positive in those CD3 cells. So I'll come to why these markers are important later on. So it also showed expression of PD1. So PD1 is a marker of a follicular helper T cell, which is usually localized within the center of the germinal centers. But if you tend to see them outside these follicles, then they are abnormal. And so was the expression of cytokine CXCL13. So now we have a marker for T cells which are positive, and we have markers for dendritic cells which are showing extra follicular positivity, and we have markers for follicular T helper cells which are showing again extra follicular positivity. So the skin biopsy was also done in this patient. However, it showed some degenerated epidermal cells, and there was only minimal inflammatory infiltrate in the epidermis. So this was reported as descriptive, morphological descriptive, with some epidermal necrosis which could be probably related to erythroderma. However, there was no evidence of any leukemic or lymphomatous infiltrate in the skin. The peripheral blood showed increased number of eosinophils, and that was also appreciable on the trephine biopsy. We can see a lot of eosinophils in the trephine. So there was eosinophilia, there was skin lesions, and we have a lymphomatous process with characteristic morphology and the characteristic immunohistochemical markers. So based upon all these three parameters, so it was labeled as angioimmunoblastic T cell lymphoma. So what is angioimmunoblastic T cell lymphoma? It accounts to a 20% of all peripheral T cell lymphomas, and it has unique features. So when I say unique features, it means clinical features, morphological features, and the immunohistochemical features. So what are the clinical features which are associated with angioimmunoblastic T cell lymphomas? So these patients usually present with systemic illness like generalized lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly, pruritic skin rash. This skin rash may be because of a leukemic infiltrate, may be because of lymphohistiocytic vasculitis, may be because of erythroderma or some non-specific eosinophilic infiltrate. So skin rash has been attributed to different morphological patterns in cases of angioimmunoblastic T-cell lymphoma. It is usually or may show bone marrow involvement, and the commonest one is a immune dysregulation in form of polyclonal hypogammaglobulinemia and hematological abnormalities like Coombs positive hemolytic anemia. And what are the classical morphological features? So there are two features. One is the architectural pattern and second is the cell morphology. Architectural pattern, depending upon the preservation of the native lymph node architecture, so it can be divided into pattern 1, 2, 3. So in pattern 1, you tend to see a follicular or a nodular pattern which is preserved, and only there is mild expansion of the paracortical zone. In pattern 2, there is marked expansion of the pericortical zone, and you tend to find only few depleted or atrophied follicles at periphery. And pattern 3 is a total effacement of the architecture. So the case which I showed fell into a pattern 2 because we saw few residual atrophic follicles which were highlighted by CD20 immunostate. Then the cell morphology. The neoplastic cells are composed of small to medium-sized lymphocytes with clear to pale cytoplasm and minimal cytological atypia. So T-cell lymphomas usually have a very deceptive looks. They can be from small size, which look like a normal lymphocytes, to very bizarre appearing. So when they are having a small morphology, then it's the most difficult thing to pick up whether these are T-cell lymphomas or we are dealing with the reactive lymph nodes. And these are usually mixed with variable number of reactive lymphocytes, eosinophils, plasma cells, and histiocytes. The histological hallmark of this type of lymphoma is marked proliferation of arborizing high endothelial venules, which I showed you, and expansion of a follicular dendritic cells. So if you see these two features, then you should start thinking of a angioimmunoblastic T-cell lymphoma, and in these cases you must do T follicular helper cell markers. So most of these angioimmunoblastic T-cell lymphomas, they are positive for CD3 expression and usually show CD4 positivity. So as I said, angioimmunoblastic lymphoma is a CD4 subtype of NHL. D cells, CD20, CD79A can be seen in the residual follicles, or you may see few larger cells which are positive for CD20, and these usually represent immunoblast in the interfollicular areas. And there is expansion of FDC meshwork which typically surrounds those high endothelial vessels. The IHC markers are positivity for T follicular helper cell associated markers. So the common ones which are available or which are commonly used in different labs are CD10, CXCL13, PD1, BCL6, and there are few other markers also, but for calling it T follicular helper cell origin, at least 2 or 3 markers should be positive to label it as a T follicular helper cell lymphoma. Of this, the CD10 is more specific because none of the other T-cell lymphomas express CD10 antigen, because this is mostly a antigen of B cells. PD1 is specific because it's strongly expressed, but it is sensitive but less specific, because sometimes you tend to see weak positivity in the paracortical T cells also. And CXCL13 positivity explains most of the clinical features and the morphological features which we see in these lymph nodes. Because this is a chemokine, it links many of those clinical and pathological features. It facilitates the entry of B cell into lymph nodes through their attachment to the high endothelial venules, which can lead to expansion of B cells. And sometimes this B cell is expanded too much that it can mimic a B cell lymphoma rather than a T cell lymphoma. In addition to these markers, most of the AITLs also show expression of CD30 in these B immunoblasts, and they show expression of EBV virus or EBAR-ish. So it has been postulated that this EBV is associated because of the decreased or compromised immune system in these patients of angioimmunoblastic T-cell lymphomas. So in these cases, it usually mimics Hodgkin's lymphoma, but in Hodgkin's lymphoma, your background T cells will be polyclonal, whereas in angioimmunoblastic, it is a monoclonal T cells. So Like we have molecular alterations in anaplastic large cell lymphomas, in angioimmunoblastic T cell lymphoma also there are few molecular alterations. Like people have seen ROA mutations, but these are also seen in certain cases of peripheral T cell lymphoma of NOS type. And the mutation on the IDH2, especially the R172K, is more frequent in AITL and is a defining mutation in angioimmunoblastic T cell lymphoma. This was about the angioimmunoblastic T cell lymphoma, but there are certain variants of peripheral T cell lymphomas which are now classified under the follicular T cell helper origin lymphomas. One is the PTCL-NOS follicular variant, which was previously known as by this name, but now it is categorized as a lymphoma of a follicular T cell helper origin. What we see in this is a nodular pattern. It looks like follicles, just looks like, maybe you can confuse it with a follicular lymphoma. However, when you do immunohistochemistry, your center of the follicle is negative for CD20, but it displays CD3, it displays CD4 positivity, and positivity for CD57, which is another follicular T helper cell marker, BCL6 and CD10. So this is, if you see, the CD3 positive T cells are expressing BCL6 and CD10. It is not the B cells which are expressing this. But this photograph is from WHF fascicle. We had not seen this case in our practice. So that was about immunoblastic T cell lymphoma. Do we have any questions here? Okay, so I'll quickly cover case 3 also, then we can take up questions. So case 3 is a 64-year-old male. Again, fever, loss of appetite, loss of weight, multiple lymph node enlargements, which included cervical, supraclavicular, axillary, and inguinal. There was some hepatomegaly and some splenomegaly. FNA done outside was reported as a granulomatous inflammation, that is, epithelioid cell granulomas were noted. So this is the PET finding. If you see, lot of lymph nodes are shining up, and these are noted both above the diaphragm and below the diaphragm. And in addition, we have few lesions which are shining up in the liver as well as in the spleen. So disseminated or generalized lymphadenopathy with some FDG-avid lesions within the spleen, and it was reported as a likely lymphomatous etiology. So this is the low power. If we see, most of these cells are looking small in size, blue appearing, then they are alternating with pale areas. So if we go to high power, the cells are again small to medium size. They are not as large as we tend to see in anaplastic large cell lymphomas. And in between, we have these type of pale looking cells which look like histiocytes because they are having vesicular nuclear chromatin and abundant eosinophilic cytoplasm. So most of these darker looking cells are appearing atypical rather than a reactive in appearance. So in addition to these dark appearing cells, we have pale looking cells which look like histiocytes. And in focal areas, there were this type of non-caseating clusters of epithelioid cells which are trying to form a vague granuloma. On immunohistochemistry, all these background cells were CD3 positive, and they showed a diffuse expression of a CD4. They were negative for CD20 and CD30. They were negative for T follicular helper phenotype markers, that is CD10, BCL6, CXCL13 and PD1. So if you remember, it did not show any high endothelial venules also, which we saw in AITL. It did not show any follicular dendritic cell meshwork expansion or a T follicular helper cell phenotype, and it was negative for CD30, which is a marker for ALCL. So we have excluded ALCL, we have excluded AITL based on morphology and immunohistochemical markers. So it is a T cell lymphoma. So if you are not able to categorize into these two subtypes, then you tend to call it NOS. So this is a case of peripheral T cell lymphoma, not otherwise specified. So what is this category? It's basically a waste basket category. So as I said, if you cannot categorize into any specific subtype, you tend to call it NOS. So that's the reason it's the most common, commonest type of lymphoma reported. And cell of origin is CD4 positive mature T cells, and it's usually associated with poor prognosis. Morphology, as I said, you can have a small to medium to large cells with hyperchromatic nuclei. The mitosis is frequent, and background can show a lot of small lymphocytes, plasma cells, eosinophils, and histiocytes. When histiocytes are quite prominent and they tend to form these granulomas, then lymphoepithelial variant or the Lennart's lymphoma was the term used for such peripheral T cell lymphomas. So probably the FNA had sampled these epithelioid cell areas, which that's why it was labeled as granulomatous inflammation. On immunophenotype, it is shows at least one T cell antigen positivity. Most commonly it is CD3, 5 or 7. Most of these are CD4 positive, although some of the cases may express CD8 expression and some can be negative for both CD4 and 8. They do not express markers of T follicular helper phenotype, and most of these nodal peripheral T cell lymphomas are of alpha beta T cell receptor subtype rather than gamma delta subtype. Since this is a most heterogeneous group of lymphomas, because it's never get to classify in different subgroups, so clinically also it is a heterogeneous subgroup. So gene expression profiling has tried to find subgroups in this type of NOS category, and they have shown that some cases show a TBX21 positivity and others show GATA3 positivity. So both these are transcription factors. So one corresponds to T helper 1 phenotype and other corresponds to T helper 2 phenotype. So T helper 2 phenotype is characterized by high expression of GATA3 or its related chemokines, whereas T helper 1 phenotype is characterized by higher expression of TBX21 and it's characterized by these chemokine productions. Again, it does not have any diagnostic relevance. However, it does have a prognostic relevance. The T cell lymphomas which express GATA3 have a poor prognosis as compared to those which have TBX21 expression, and those which are unclassifiable, they lie in between these two subgroups. So this is based on a gene expression profiling. However, similar results can be obtained by using immunohistochemistry, as antibodies for both these markers are available. For TBX21, the cutoff used is 10%, and for GATA3 positivity, more than 1% positivity is taken as positive. So this finishes with the nodal T cell lymphomas. We have done ALCL, we have done angioimmunoblastic T cell lymphoma, and we have done a category which cannot be further classified, that is NOS. So can we take few questions here? Okay, so if we don't have any questions, I think, should I go to case number 4? Okay. So case number 4 is of Mr. SR, who is a 21-year male. He presented with a periorbital swelling and also with abdominal pain and jaundice. On CT of paranasal sinuses, there was a polypoidal mass in the maxillary sinus which was extending in the nasal cavity. On CECT, there was a heterogeneous mass in addition, which was involving the pancreatic uncinate process, and there was evidence of some small retroperitoneal and mesenteric lymph nodes. Patient had cholelithiasis and mild hepatosplenomegaly. So this is the PET images. We can see a PET avid lesion in a nasal cavity which is also extending into a maxillary sinus. There is presence of lymph nodes on both sides of diaphragm. In addition, there were lesions in the right adrenal, pancreas, liver, even in the skeletal. So this is the biopsy from a maxillary sinus or a nasal cavity. If you see here, there is lot of necrosis and we have some viable cells at the upper end. This is the area. So most of the times in such cases, if we take biopsy from the nasal cavity or maxillary sinus, mostly it yields a necrotic tissue. So and in this necrotic tissue, we have scattered cells which are usually overlooked, and it's reported as a necrotizing inflammation. And multiple biopsies have to be done for reaching a conclusive diagnosis. And these areas of necrosis are because of the propensity of these cells, lymphoid cells, to infiltrate the wall of these blood vessels. So we have areas of necrosis, we have these lymphoid cells which are not looking that bad, they are trying to infiltrate the wall of the vessel. So this is the cellular area. If you see, the cells are medium to small size again, and on the surface we have necrosis. This is a high power to show some atypia in these cells, lot of nuclear debris, which indicates it's quite a proliferative lesion. And if we do immunohistochemistry, it shows positivity for CD3. So if we see CD3 is not as bright as we see CD3 epsilon positivity in these cells. So most of these lymphomas, they tend to show a cytoplasmic CD3 positivity, which is because of CD3 epsilon change rather than a pan CD3 marker. These cells also show positivity for CD56, and they are showing a nuclear expression for EBAR-ish. They are diffusely positive for EBAR-ish. So site of the lesion, the immunohistochemistry panel, which is showing positivity for CD3 epsilon, CD56, and diffusely positive for EBAR-ish. So diagnosis is extranodal NK T-cell lymphoma of a nasal type. However, this patient also had lesions in the pancreas and the ampullary region from where the biopsy was done. So we can see this is a duodenal biopsy. However, this one fragment looks quite cellular. So this is the high power of same. We can see similar cells what we saw in the nasal biopsy, and similar pattern of immunohistochemistry like CD3 positivity, CD56 positivity, and diffuse positivity for EBAR-ish. So NK T-cell lymphoma, it's not involving only the nasal cavity, but it's also involved in a ampullary region of the duodenum. So based upon this, it was called as NK T-cell lymphoma. However, the biopsy from a papillary growth showed infiltration by NK T-cell lymphoma. It was staged as a stage 4B NK T-cell lymphoma. So extranodal NK T-cell lymphoma nasal type, which is a prototype of these NK T-cell lymphomas, is usually present in the extranodal site, particularly in the upper aerodigestive tract, which involves the nasal cavity, nasopharynx, and palate. Previously, it was also known as polymorphic reticulosis or lethal midnight granuloma. However, these terms are now obsolete. And primary nodal NK T-cell lymphomas are rare, but they have been reported. Histologically, again, atypical polymorphic infiltrate with broad spectrum of cell morphology from small to medium to large transformed cells. As I showed, they have a propensity to invade and destroy the blood vessels, which is termed as angiocentricity, and this angiocentricity is responsible for varying degrees of necrosis. And because of this necrosis, especially in the nasal cavity, since they are taking only superficial biopsies, multiple biopsies are frequently necessary for establishing a diagnosis of NK T-cell lymphoma. Though I said nodal NK T-cell lymphomas are rare, we do have one case of NK T-cell lymphoma involving the lymph nodes. So this is a lymph node biopsy, which is slightly fragmented. We can see replacement of the lymph node by these blue appearing cells, and in background there are a lot of eosinophils also, and again cells are of medium size. They are not too large, not too small. They were positive for CD3 and CD56, and they were strongly positive for EBAR-ish. So you can ask me why you did these markers in a lymph node pathology if the nodal NK T-cell lymphomas are extremely rare. The reason this panel of immunohistochemistry was done, because this was a young patient, it did not show a lymphoblastic morphology. It was so in young patients, before calling it peripheral T-cell lymphoma, NOS, or any other lymphoma, so we should rule out NK cell lymphomas in a younger patient which are showing T-cell marker positivity. So in these cases, immunophenotype is of NK cell markers, which is CD2 positive, surface CD3 negative, but cytoplasmic CD3 epsilon positivity. They may show CD56 expression. Since they are lacking the T cell receptors, they do not show T cell receptor gene rearrangements. And Epstein-Barr virus positivity is one of the defining features. If EBV is negative, then you should tend to reconsider your diagnosis. So that was about case 4.
Can I come in here? Sorry, by the time I could respond to that before case 4.
Okay.
You started anyway. There are a few questions. Would you like to take them one by one?
Yes, yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, at that time I couldn't respond. First question is Dr. Ritambra. She says GATA3 and TBX1 stain. Any specific clones and pattern of positivity?
Clones I'm not aware of because we are not using. So, but pattern of positivity, they say that you should use a particular cutoff for TBX21, 10%, because they tend to be positive in some of the GATA3 positive lymphomas also. So they have kept a higher cutoff for TBX21, whereas for GATA3, it is specific for GATA3 subtype. It does not show non-specific positivity in TBX21 subtype. So cutoff has been kept as at a lower level, so 1%. So that is the positive pattern, but it usually shows around 40 to 80% of the neoplastic cells tend to show positivity in both the subgroups for their respective antibodies.
Right. So if anybody wants to counter or may add any comment to that, they can unmute their mic and give a comment straight away. Okay, there is another question by Dr. Minesh Gandhi. First, let me, clarify. Dr. Minesh Gandhi is from Ahmedabad. He has clarified, I'm from Ahmedabad, not Rajkot. I'm so sorry for that, Dr. Minesh Gandhi. He's from Ahmedabad. The question is how to differentiate ALK negative ALCL from CD30 positive PTCL NOS.
Yes, that's an excellent question because most of the cases have been sorted by gene expression profiling. So when people have done gene expression profiling, they have seen that ALK negative ALCL tends to cluster with ALK positive ALCL rather than peripheral T cell NOS. So here the important point is CD30 expression. So in peripheral T cell lymphomas, mostly the CD30 expression is weak and patchy, whereas in ALK negative ALCL lymphomas, the CD30 expression is very strong and diffuse. So even if you are finding a lesser CD30 positivity, then you should, tend to keep ALCL away and drift more towards a peripheral T cell lymphoma NOS type.
Right. There's a question, in fact, it's a critical question by Dr. Ritambra. She says, if nasal biopsy was not done earlier, will pancreatic tumor can get reported as a neuroendocrine tumor due to CD56 positivity?
In this case, if you have seen that image of, let me go back to this pancreatic biopsy. Dr. Ritambra is a GI pathologist. So if you see what is odd for neuroendocrine is the discrete cell population, right? In neuroendocrine tumors, you tend to see a organoid pattern or some clustering and they are morely uniform looking cells. Here there is some variation in the cell size and most of these cells are dispersed. So in this case, it would have gone as a T cell lymphoma, not specifically NK T cell lymphoma, but I am sure not as a neuroendocrine tumor.
Okay. Dr. Minesh Gandhi from Ahmedabad has another question. PTCL NOS with CD30 and CD15 positivity, how do we differentiate that from Hodgkin's lymphoma?
Okay, so even for Hodgkin's also your RS cells should be strong CD30 positive. Mostly in PT cells it is a weak CD30 positivity, and then CD15 positivity, I agree with you, it causes lot of confusion, but then you have to look at your background population of T cells. In Hodgkin's lymphoma it is again a CD3 positive T cell background. In peripheral T cell lymphoma it is again a T cell background. So here comes the role of morphology, right? So in T cell lymphomas, you tend to see slightly more mitotically active and abnormal looking cells in the background in contrast to Hodgkin's background, which is more mature looking and less proliferative background.
Right. Dr. Ritambra has another comment on that, on a question as well. How do we do TCR gene rearrangement?
So TCR gene rearrangements, now, initially it was quite difficult. You had to use either a fresh tissue for TCR beta IHC, You can do it by flow, and you can do it by molecular studies, by fragment analysis. So there are commercially available kits for this TCR, alpha, beta, and gamma delta. So it can be done using fragment analysis on Sanger sequencer. So you have three options. The easiest one is doing immunohistochemistry. So antibodies are now available for alpha, beta, and gamma delta also for paraffin sections. Initially, they were not available. They were only available for frozen sections. Or you could have done flow. And third is by using a fragment analysis using Sanger sequencing.
Wow, great. I think that we are done with this set of questions. Let's go ahead with the cases.
Okay.
Would you like to take a break? Have a glass of water? You must be tired by now.
No, it's all right. Yeah.
Okay, please carry on. Thank you so much. Right.
So starting with case 5, I don't have much history because this is a 64-year male which presented with an acute abdomen due to intestinal obstruction, and what we got was a fragment of a small intestine. So if you see, this is a small intestine. We can see a lesion here and a lesion here. And this is the cut open surface, a lesion here and some lesion here. So the lower panel is showing a closer view of both these lesions. This is from the serosal aspect. You can see a nodular lesion which is bulging out from the serosa. And this is from the mucosal aspect. It's a plaque-like thickening with some areas of necrosis and ulceration. So there was no previous history which was available to us. It was just an incidental intestinal obstruction, and emergency surgery was done for this patient. So if we see here, this is the adjoining normal looking small intestine, and here we have a section from that plaque-like or elevated lesion which is quite thickened and is infiltrated by cells. Another area which is showing some evidence of ulceration and hemorrhage, and this is again to show diffuse sheet. So this power is only showing the adjoining mucosa and infiltration or a thickened area which is infiltrated by cells. You cannot demonstrate the nature of these cells. So coming to the lesional area, we have these cells which are infiltrating. These are the smooth muscle of the intestine. These cells are infiltrating through the smooth muscle, so it's infiltrating the muscularis propria. The lower panel tries to show the morphology. If you see, there is lot of variation in the size of these neoplastic cells. Some are large, some are smaller, and in background we have few small lymphocytes also. So this is again a more closer look. You can see the amount of pleomorphism these cells are showing. So this feature is important to note whether these are pleomorphic or these are monomorphic in appearance. So at this magnification, you can see this large atypical or a pleomorphic cell here, lot of mitosis happening here, and again cells with vesicular nucleus and prominent nuclei. So at least this slide shows you the amount of pleomorphism these cells are showing. So these cells were very faintly positive for CD3. I'll come to this later on, why they are showing weak positivity. The pan-cytokeratin was negative. It's highlighting the overlying normal mucosa, because in GI, your commonest differential is epithelial malignancy. These were negative for CD5 and they were also negative for CD20. However, they showed a diffuse positivity for CD30. This is a low power to show the extent of positivity, and this is higher magnification to show the bright positivity again with the Golgi zone accentuation. They were negative for CD68, and there were few plasma cells which were present in a normal looking mucosa but not in the neoplastic area. They were negative for CD4 and CD8, and they were also negative for CD5. If I go back to the first slide, if we evaluate this normal looking area, so this is a jejunal fragment. So if you see the mucosa of the jejunum, which should be normally tall villus, is flattened. So we have a broad and blunted villi in the surrounding jejunum. When we looked at our previous records, we found a duodenal biopsy was done for this patient a few months before the perforation happened, which also showed this shortening and blunting of the villi, and there was increase in the intraepithelial lymphocytes, and there was associated crypt hypoplasia, and it was reported as a partial villus atrophy consistent with celiac disease. So based on these findings, it was labeled as enteropathy associated T-cell lymphoma. So if we come to the T-cell or NK cell lymphomas of GI tract, there are 4 subtypes. Enteropathy associated T-cell lymphoma, which was previously known as type 1. The second is monomorphic epitheliotropic intestinal T-cell lymphoma, which was previously called as EATL type 2, but now it is no more called as EATL type 2. It has its specific name, that is monomorphic epitheliotropic intestinal T-cell lymphoma. And the GI can also get extranodal NK T-cell lymphomas, nasal type of GI tract. It is termed as nasal type because morphologically and immunophenotypically it resembles nasal type NK T-cell lymphomas. However, they are occurring in a GI tract. And then we have indolent T-cell proliferations and NK cell proliferations of GI tract. Enteropathy associated T-cell lymphoma, the case which we saw just now, is usually arise in the intestine with the intraepithelial T-cell lymphocytes as a cell of origin. Usually it is seen in elderly patient, and the most common site of origin is jejunum, and other sites like small intestine, other parts of small intestine, stomach and colon are rarely involved. And 40% of these patients present with acute abdomen either due to obstruction or with perforation, resulting in acute peritonitis and requiring emergency surgery. So this was the case in what we saw just now. So EATL is known as enteropathy associated T-cell lymphoma because it has relation with the celiac disease. So it shows a striking association with celiac disease, suggesting that chronic stimulation of intraepithelial lymphocytes by nutritional gluten may be an important factor in lymphoma genesis. So these patients may show or may present with some history of malabsorption, but they may not give any history of malabsorption. So clinically your celiac disease may be silent also, and these patients usually present with obstruction and perforation when they are first diagnosed as EATL. And it's most commonly associated with refractory celiac disease, not with the celiac disease which responds to gluten-free therapy. And refractory celiac disease has been classified as type 1 and type 2. So type 1 is normal surface T-cell receptors that show CD3 and CD8 expression, and they are polyclonal in nature. Whereas in refractory celiac disease type 2, they lose their CD3 expression or CD8 expression, but they express cytoplasmic CD3, and most of these cells are monoclonal in nature. So most of these EATL lymphomas are associated with type 2 refractory celiac disease. So this is another case. Again, this case presented with perforation. So we have a lesion here which is hemorrhagic, and it's showing just a plaque-like thickening of the small intestine. This is the low power. We see ulcer here, and we see infiltration by tumor cells, quite resulting in thickening of the wall. And we see these cells are more or less uniform in appearance in contrast to what we saw in a previous slide. So cells are almost of same size. And in addition, they are showing a lot of epitheliotropism. So most of these crypts of small intestine, they are infiltrated by these neoplastic cells. And if you look at the adjoining small intestine, it is showing normally oriented tall villi. So this is in contrast to the previous case what we saw. So the adjoining intestine is normal appearing. It does not show any features of celiac disease, and the cell morphology in the lymphomatous areas are more or less monomorphic. Immunohistochemistry, CD3 positivity, but they are negative for CD4, CD8 and CD5, and they are showing diffuse positivity for CD56. So all these features no association with celiac disease, monomorphic appearance of lymphocytic cells, lot of epitheliotropism in the adjoining normal looking intestine, and in addition to CD3 positivity, CD56 positivity. So this classifies for monomorphic epitheliotropic intestinal T cell lymphoma. In Asian population, we tend to see more of monomorphic epitheliotropic intestinal T cell lymphomas in contrast to celiac associated, which are more common in European and Western population. So these are the tables which are showing the differentiating features which I have already highlighted. EATL is more common in whites, where celiac disease is more prevalent compared to Asians, whereas this monomorphic epitheliotropic intestinal is more common in Asian population. This one shows strong association with the celiac disease, however, no association with celiac disease. That is why they have now been separated, not called as EATL type 1 or type 2. So they have their specific names. Morphologically, polymorphic, more pleomorphic population with lot of necrosis. But this one is showing monomorphic infiltrate without extensive necrosis, and epitheliotropism is more common in MEITL rather than EATL. Markers, as I said, CD3 positivity, but CD56 is negative, CD30 is plus minus. Here CD3 is positive and it is also positive for CD56. There is a new marker which is coming up, which is megakaryocyte associated tyrosine kinase, which is consistently positive in monomorphic epitheliotropic intestinal T cell lymphoma and not seen in EATL lymphoma. So these are the few morphological features and immunohistochemical features which can differentiate these two entities. So this was about enteropathy associated T cell lymphoma and its differential monomorphic epitheliotropism intestinal T cell lymphoma. So now I am coming to case number 6, which is the last case. So I think we can have discussion in the end. So I'll just continue with this. So this is a case of a 27-year male who is a young male with the complaints of low-grade fever, and there is progressive flank fullness. Again, fever and weight loss, worsening pedal edema, and decline in performance status for past few months. Lymph nodes were subcentimetric, no definite peripheral lymphadenopathy was noted. However, the spleen was markedly enlarged, that is 22 centimeter below the costal margin. And same was confirmed on ultrasound examination, and there was ultrasound also demonstrated mild hepatomegaly, and there was evidence of some pleural effusion. There was no evidence of malaria or Kala-Azar, because once you see a massive splenomegaly, there's tropical diseases come into picture. However, this was ruled out. The patient underwent FNAC from a splenic region. However, unfortunately, he developed hemoperitoneum and emergency splenectomy was to be done. So this is the PET findings in this case. If you see, the size of the liver and size of spleen is almost similar. So spleen is massively enlarged, and if we can appreciate here, there are dark areas which are not picked up. So these areas represent the infarct, which are also noticed on the corresponding CT images. So massively enlarged spleen with evidence of splenic infarcts, and if you have to compare the size, you should compare it with liver. So almost both of them are looking of a similar size. So this is a splenectomy specimen. So this is a capsular surface, and we can see a large pale infarct from the capsular surface. We do not find any nodularity here. So I don't have a cut section of this, but cut section did not show any nodules, small or large, and it was red congested spleen on cut section and weighed 2 kgs in weigh. So this is low power of spleen. We can see red pulp is quite busy. So here on the right side we have one nodular collection, so which is usually seen in a peri-arteriolar region, but red pulp does not show this much cellularity in a normal spleen. So we can call it as a busy red pulp. So this is high power of the red pulp, and we can see these again medium-sized cells with nuclear chromatin which is not very condensed, no conspicuous nucleoli is noted. And if you see the pattern of the infiltration of these cells, it is trying to arrange themselves in the splenic cords. So here you can appreciate the location of these cells better. So these cells are limiting themselves to the splenic cords. So this pattern of infiltration is important for diagnosis. CD20 was negative in these cells. These cells which were lying in the splenic cords was highlighted by CD3 immunostain. It was negative for both CD4 and CD8, and they also showed faint expression by CD56. In this patient, whenever they do splenectomy for such massive splenomegaly, they tend to take a liver biopsy also, and this liver biopsy also shows infiltrate by these similar looking cells, and this infiltrate is limited to the sinusoids of the liver. And this is the high power to show these cells, lymphoma cells within the sinusoids, and they were highlighted by CD3 immunostain. Again, it is not showing any portal tract infiltration. It is not infiltrating the hepatic parenchyma. The cells are limiting themselves to the hepatic sinusoids. In this case, the bone marrow was also done. The peripheral blood did show some evidence of cytopenias. Hemoglobin was also low. Trephine biopsy was also done. So if you can see on trephine biopsy at this magnification, nobody can say there is anything wrong with this, though it shows some increase in cellularity. However, since there was a marked splenomegaly and hepatomegaly, so IHC was done in this case. So you can see these CD3 cells, they are again traveling within the sinusoids of the bone marrow. And these cells were also positive for CD56 as we saw in a spleen. So in trephine, the lymphoma cells were limited to sinusoidal pattern of infiltration. They showed expression of CD3 and they were also positive for CD56. So this picture is consistent with the picture of a hepatosplenic T cell lymphoma with sinusoidal pattern of infiltration in spleen, liver, as well as bone marrow. So at that time, from bone marrow flow was done for this patient, which did show a TCR gamma delta phenotype of these neoplastic cells, that is CD3 positive cells from a marrow. So this is gamma delta hepatosplenic T cell lymphoma. So what is this entity? It is uncommon but distinctive form of a peripheral T cell lymphoma. Again, it's seen in a younger patient as compared to other T cell lymphomas which are dominantly seen in elderly patients and have a male predominance. The predominant symptoms are hepatosplenomegaly, may show systemic symptoms with or without pancytopenia or isolated anemia or thrombocytopenia. Usually there is no peripheral lymphadenopathy, and most of these lymphomas tend to occur in a setting of immunosuppression such as organ transplant recipients, Crohn's disease, and rare associations have been associated with hepatitis B infection. And recently, since a lot of TNF inhibitors are being used in rheumatology practice and even in psoriasis, so people who are getting treated with these TNF inhibitors at a higher risk of getting these hepatosplenic T cell lymphomas. These lymphomas are characterized by uniform medium-sized lymphoma cells expressing T lineage markers, and as I said, the dominant pattern is sinusoidal pattern of infiltration. So spleen was markedly large. Usually they weigh more than 1 kg. On cut surface, they give a beefy red appearance, does not give that whitey nodular appearance as we tend to see in other types of lymphoma. So in like splenic marginal zone lymphoma, you tend to see small nodules which are white pulp based. In higher grade lymphomas, you tend to see white large nodular lesions. But in hepatosplenic T cell lymphoma, since the red pulp is the main region of involvement, it does not show any nodularity and it gives a congested red beefy appearance on gross. Immunophenotype is, since it is a neoplasm of non-activated cytotoxic T lymphocytes, majority of them are of gamma delta phenotype, but some percentage rarely do express alpha beta phenotype also. They usually do not express CD5, 4 or 8. some cases of CD8 expression have also been reported. And among the cytotoxic markers, TIA1 is the most frequently expressed, but not perforin or granzyme B. And most of these T-cell lymphomas also show expression for CD56. So that's why most of these lymphomas, extranodal lymphomas, are clubbed like NK T-cell lymphomas rather than pure T-cell or pure NK cell lymphomas. So this case highlighted the classical clinical features, classical gross appearance, and classical pattern of infiltration in hepatosplenic T-cell lymphomas. Professor Reena Das from Department of Hematology published a series of pure intersinusoidal bone marrow infiltration patterns. So she has highlighted that on morphology you may not appreciate the lymphomatous cells because they are purely within the sinusoids. So you should have a high index of suspicion in these cases, and most of these cases which were included in this series had marked hepatosplenomegaly and no lymphadenopathy. So in cases where you are suspecting lymphoma with marked hepatosplenomegaly, even if you are not finding any morphological evidence of lymphomatous infiltration in trephine biopsies, you should tend to do immunohistochemical markers, especially CD3 and CD56. So this finishes with the cases. So I have done 3 nodal and 3 extranodal T-cell lymphomas. So take home message from this talk is the diagnosis of T-cell lymphomas requires multi-pronged approach. Clinical information is the most important because whether it's peripheral lymphadenopathy or it is extranodal location of lymphoma, any autoimmune features as we saw in AITL, any skin lesions. And second is the morphological examination. If you have noticed throughout this lecture, there were morphological clues to each subtype of T-cell lymphomas, both in the lymph nodes as well as in the extranodal location. And your morphology will guide you the optimal panel of immunohistochemistry which you will put up in your cases. And rarely, if you are not able to reach a conclusive diagnosis, you can take help of ancillary studies like flow cytometry, FISH, and clonality assays, as have already been highlighted in different cases. So thank you very much. So I have to acknowledge my colleagues, Professor Ashim Das and Dr. Pulkit Rastogi, who have contributed in reporting of these lymphomas. And I also want to acknowledge departments of nuclear medicine, internal medicine and hemato-oncology, and Department of Hematology for contributing these PET CTs, clinical information, as well as the bone marrow findings and the trephine findings, and all members of the lymphoma group of PGIMER who in one or other way tend to contribute in the final MDD diagnosis of these lymphomas. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Wonderful. Take a deep breath. Yeah, very difficult.
I can stop sharing my screen.
Yes, please. Please stop sharing so that we can see you on the screen. Yeah. Right. Is your video on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So let's come to some of the questions and the comments. First, Dr. Ritambra says, thank you. Then Dr. Minesh Gandhi has a question, how to pick up angioimmunoblastic lymphoma pattern 1 morphologically because it's commonly interpreted as reactive lymph node.
Yes, I agree. Pattern 1 is difficult, but as you see, if in any elderly patient, if you get a lymph node biopsy, which is enlarged and clinically abnormal, you should do your panel of markers, right? Because even if it's in situ lymphomas, which are B-cell lymphomas, they are picked up by doing immunohistochemistry only. So pattern 1, I agree, is the most difficult to pick up, but all lymphadenopathies, if they are clinically generalized and look like reactive, you should put your IHC markers in elderly patients.
Yeah, clinical is very important. Dr. Ashok Malik says, very interesting case of EATL. Thank you, sir, for joining. Then Dr. Pulkit has a question. He says, how far one should go for diagnosis of TNHL in core biopsies in non-ALCL cases?
That's a difficult question, Pulkit. So I would like to have your opinion on this. So diagnosing core
All is back
T-cell
on Pulkit's board.
So yeah, often we receive the core biopsies these days. They don't give the intact lymph node excision specimen, and we struggle when we have a CD3 population, positive population more than CD20. We have just scattered CD20 positive cells, and whether to call it a reactive T cell proliferation or neoplastic T cell proliferation. And sometimes we stuck with, and when we do, when we exhaust the biopsies with all the available T cell markers, sometimes we may have some down regulation of CD7 or like that, but still we are not confident of giving our diagnosis of TNHL in those cases, because sometimes you have a B cell lymphoma in the adjacent lymph node and you have this reaction in the side, a lymph node sitting at the side. So these cases are really challenging for us, and then I think the role of clonality comes in these cases.
Yeah, I agree with Pulkit, because B cell lymphomas on core biopsies are much easier to diagnose as compared to T cell lymphomas. So if there is no peripheral lymphadenopathy, then we cannot, ask them to do a intact lymph node biopsy. So in such cases, we do find difficulty in reaching a conclusive diagnosis.
Yeah, Dr. Minesh Gandhi's next question is almost exactly similar to what Dr. Pulkit and you have said. How to differentiate indolent T cell lymphoproliferative disease of GIT from lymphoma in the biopsy specimens. It's almost similar.
Yeah, I think Dr. Das would like to talk on this, because we had similar one case which Dr. Das reported, indolent T cell lymphoma, and it had a very nice clinical history also. Dr. Das, would you like to take up this?
Yes, sometimes you can see with this type of presentation, the elderly man with a prolonged diarrhea, what you see in the biopsy is the lamina propria is full of lymphocytes, which are T cells or TNK cells. But what they don't do is that they don't destroy the crypts, or they don't destroy, or don't form an epithelial trophism, or they don't infiltrate the epithelium. The most important thing is the Ki67. In fact, according to WHO, they say it should be less than 10%. But one caution is that you should not count those crypt, because crypt is you will see a lot of Ki67 positive crypts. So if you don't see any destruction, even a little bit of infiltration into the muscularis mucosae, that will qualify for essentially this type of indolent lymphoproliferative disorder. Another thing is that in a neoplastic T cell disorder, which is a very characteristic feature, is the loss of T cell antigen, which you will not see in this type of indolent T cell lymphoproliferative disorder. So no loss of T cell antigen, no destruction of crypts, no epithelial infiltration, and Ki67 will be less than 10%. That will determine that you are dealing with the indolent T cell lymphoproliferative disorder.
So Dr. Das shared this case with me, and if sir remembers, it had a very nice polypoidal or elevated lesions on endoscopy, but they vanished by itself after some time. So I think this patient was not given any treatment, if I'm right.
Generally, clinician gives something. So even sometimes they give antibiotics, sometimes they give even the therapy also, T cell lymphoma therapy. So that is always clinician does.
Another question, thank you, sir. Another question is pediatric lymph node morphologically looks like T cell lymphoma. Even with IHC, how to differentiate from ALPS?
ALPS versus T cell lymphoma for pediatric population, clonality is must. So you cannot differentiate this. So we have, suffered because of this many times. So clonality is the only answer in these cases.
Right. Now let me see. Yeah, Dr. Pulkit says soft pointer of SH. Yeah, there is another comment by Dr. Nilesh was HSTCL gamma delta type.
Okay, what about this? Hepatosplenic gamma delta?
Yeah, I just made a comment on that.
Okay.
So, Dr. Pulkit says soft pointer of HSTL to find biopsies, erythroid hyperplasia plus cytopenia.
Hmm.
When we have some comments, Dr. Pulkit says nice compilation of cases. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Nilesh Kapadia says very fruitful and digestible. Would like to hear her again on other lymphomas also. So yeah,
you.
Dr. Gandhi again says thank you to Dr. Das sir. Dr. Ditambra says will PID background help in pediatric T-cell lymphoma, T-cell proliferation?
You know that primary immunodeficiency and T cell proliferation is again a very difficult area. So even if it is not primary immunodeficiency, we have seen there were few cases of HIV where we had not T cell lymphomas but Hodgkin's lymphoma. But if you give HIV treatment, these lymph nodes they vanish themselves. You don't have to specifically treat this lymphomatous process. So I think if PID is taken care of, these lymphomatous proliferations they vanish themselves.
Can I add something here?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So regarding the ALPS on a tissue, so it is not the diagnosis is not a tissue-based diagnosis. So it is a diagnosis based on peripheral blood flow cytometry based on the presence of double negative T cells. And it is just the morphological correlate that you see in a lymph node biopsy. So always ask to go for a peripheral blood flow cytometry if you want to diagnose ALPS, and further an NGS panel to detect the Fas ligand mutation, which is the diagnostic. A tissue diagnosis cannot offer the definite diagnosis of a autoimmune lymphoproliferative disease.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Pulkit, for that comment. Anybody else would like to have a comment or maybe add something to that? Dr. Ashok Malik sir says reminds me of our excellent CPC session in PGI. Thank you, sir. So I think there are no more comments. So I would like to thank Dr. Amandeep ma'am. Thank you so much for this excellent presentation and a wonderful question hour session. We had a wonderful time. Thank you so much for that. And I think as you can see, you are in demand to come back again with other lymphomas. We will request you maybe sometime after a month or so to come back with something of a different, on a different platform, on a different, area, right? Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Take care.